Welcome, everybody, to this fantastic joint Transportation Research Forum event between the Twin Cities and Chicago chapters of TRF. We have an exciting program today. We're going to learn a little bit about recent developments with the additional service on the Chicago Twin Cities corridor and maybe a couple of other updates on passenger rail service in the Midwest. Before we get started here with the program, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Eric Kempel. I'm a transport policy advisor at DePaul, and I also run my own consulting firm, Kempel International Transportation Consulting. I would also like to introduce Frank Duma. Frank, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I'm Frank Dauma. I'm a researcher at the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs, associated also with the university's Center for Transportation Studies, and have been leading the Twin Cities chapter of the Transportation Research Forum for the last few years. Very, very pleased that the Chicago chapter reached out and invited us to be a co-sponsor of today's session. And we've done other sessions on a wide variety of topics, ranging from freight to automated vehicles to today's session on passenger rail. If folks from the Twin Cities enjoy this and would like to become part of the group and get onto our mailing list, they can certainly feel free to let me know, and I can work with Crystal to arrange distributing contact information if that's not immediately available.
Great. Thank you very much, Frank. And I would certainly echo that for the folks here in Chicago. If you're not a member of TRF, please let us know, reach out, and we can get you signed up. So the agenda today, we're going to start with our program for about the first 20 to 25 minutes. After that time, Frank and myself will provide a little bit of commentary on what we've heard, and then we'll turn it over to audience Q&A. And the way the Q&A will work, right now, the chat box is disabled. But after we complete the first part of the program, our audience can put questions into the chat box, and then some combination of Frank or myself will read off some of those questions, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. I know we've got a pretty big group here with us today, so I'm sure we won't be able to get to all of those questions. So let's move right along into why you're all here, which is to hear our speakers for today. Dick Rogers is the Business Planning and Analysis Manager at Amtrak, working out of Chicago Union Station. He has a very long history working in the railroad industry and can tell you everything you've ever wanted to know about the intricacies of Chicago politics. Our other speaker with us today is Derrick James. You probably know him as the face and voice of Amtrak if you've gone to anything where Amtrak was present, certainly here in the Midwest. He is the Senior Manager, Government Affairs, State and Local Legislative Relations at Amtrak, also based out of Chicago. And so with that, I am going to turn the floor over to these two gentlemen, Derrick and Dick. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, I'm joined by my colleague, Dick Rogers. He and I work together very closely on the project that we're going to talk about today. All right, well, the project that Dick and I have been working on, and the reason for us being here today, is the what we call TCMC, or the Chicago to Twin Cities project. We have been in partnership for several years with the states of Minnesota and the state of Wisconsin and the state of Illinois on increasing service in this particular corridor. We've had a long-standing relationship with the Wisconsin Department of Transportation on a portion of the corridor, specifically the Chicago to Milwaukee portion of the corridor. Many of you may know this. The presentation that I'm providing to you today, one of the things that I've been engaged with the communities and along the route is to gain political support for the expansion of service along this particular corridor. Where we stand right now, the federal government has been, in addition to providing Amtrak with an annual appropriation, we also provide, the federal government has several grant programs with which the states can apply for to invest in the capital infrastructure that's needed to make upgrades and expand and improve passenger rail. The states of Illinois and Wisconsin have been very aggressive in terms of going after those dollars for increases in service and improvements to the existing Chicago to Hiawatha corridor, which many of you may know is a multi-frequency corridor between Chicago and Milwaukee with 7 round trips a day. And the states of Illinois and Wisconsin have been working in partnership with the federal government and the host railroad to increase those services to 10 round trips a day, a project somewhere in the neighborhood of ultimately $300 million. And we've made some significant progress in terms of receiving grants to make some of those improvements along the right-of-way. As far as with the TCMC service, this is a sort of a newer grant recipient. I'll get into that, but just wanted to, in case for those who may not be familiar with Amtrak, I brief the legislators and sort of give them a primer on Amtrak, since Amtrak is not as much of a presence in the state of Minnesota. I inform them of our quasi-public role, our creation in 1970, sort of the basics of the route network, including where we go, how we receive funding, how we've been doing in terms of our performance over the past decade and a half in terms of growing ridership. Notwithstanding the pandemic, which has hurt all of commercial transportation, in fiscal year 2019, I remind them that Amtrak was able to break a ridership record carrying more than 32 million customers, and that support, that ridership and those improvements that we've been making have been because of bipartisan support from Congress. Because of Amtrak's nature of the service that we've been providing along both urban corridors in parts of the country as well as across much of rural America, has really given us an intro into both aisles, if you will, of the Congress. And they have shown that in terms of the financial support that they have provided to us. I say that because in Minnesota, support for transit and passenger rail, unfortunately, is not bipartisan in nature, and I try to show an example of Amtrak nationally, how we've moved beyond that, and that success has been borne out with improvements in ridership. I indicate the level of investment that we've been making across the system, and made possible by the reduction in the operating loss. Again, if not for the pandemic, Amtrak was projecting fiscal year 20 to be the first year where we would not need to use any federal dollars to support the operations of the network. Again, supported by robust capital investments, which transit needs and which we will still need, and the Congress has been willing to provide that. I indicate to the legislators that Amtrak, even though the state of Minnesota has not been a partner with Amtrak from a financial perspective for the types of services that we run, say between Chicago and Milwaukee, or Chicago and Detroit, or on certain California corridors, or in North Carolina, I indicate that the taxpayer investment in Amtrak is worthwhile and does generate investment and economic activity within the state of Minnesota. In fiscal year 19, Amtrak spent $71 million in procurement with companies within the state of Minnesota. Some of the big firms, one of the biggest is Loram, which is a rail equipment manufacturer in Hamel, Minnesota. And I list some of the other firms around the state that have been vendors of Amtrak. I also indicate that we've been making investments in the passenger rail network within the state of Minnesota, especially with regard to investments in the physical stations themselves. Red Wing is a rural station south of the Twin Cities. Winona, we are preparing to invest significant dollars in platform upgrades On the right there, you'll note La Crosse. La Crosse, yes, correct, is not in the state of Minnesota. It is in Wisconsin, but it's right on the border. Quite the catchment area within Minnesota, including many folks from Rochester who are going to and from Rochester will use the La Crosse station, where we have interline bus service with a private charter operator to connect Rochester folks with the Amtrak network. I provide examples of rail network growth that's been happening around the U.S. In partnership with other states, that other states have been very aggressive at going after the federal dollars that are made available through programs like the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Grant Program, or the Restoration and Enhancement Grants. Here is an example of public officials doing at a ribbon cutting for new passenger rail service. I talk about states like North Carolina, a southern state that is moving aggressively to expand their rail service. Virginia, with new and expanded service to Roanoke and Norfolk. I also talk about expansion that we're working on with other states. Dallas-Fort Worth to Oklahoma City and up to Kansas City in partnership with Kansas and Oklahoma. I again highlight the Hiawathas, which is right next door, and the improvements that we've been making on other corridors in the Midwest in partnership with those states. I remind them that what we're asking, the partnership we're seeking of Minnesota is not something new, but it's something that we do with 18 other states, that it's a partnership to add mobility and increase the access to communities both large and small within states across the U.S. on the Amtrak network. Again, I remind them that the federal dollars are out there for them to access, that other states have been successful at doing so, and I remind them that Amtrak, the improvements that we've been making in our operating performance, again, increasing ridership and reducing our operating subsidy, has resulted in a lot more credibility that we have with the funders on Capitol Hill, including in this pandemic period where we were successful in seeking CARES Act funding both last summer and then in the recently passed Omnibus Appropriations Bill in December, additional funds to keep the system afloat until the economy returns and then ridership returns. I highlight that Minnesota is part of a consortium of states in the Midwest that has been working to advance passenger rail to improve the competitiveness of the region. Here on the right is a working map from the Federal Railroad Administration as part of their Connect program that's looking at and analyzing the corridors where it makes sense to invest in passenger rail, and conceivably that the federal government is willing to be a partner, as they have been on several of these corridors. And highlighted there in purple is the Chicago-Milwaukee Twin Cities route. It is considered one of the top corridors in the Midwest for potential passenger rail service from a demand perspective, that there are just the population centers along the corridor, the amount of traffic that's moving back and forth. Passenger rail could be extremely successful. And so the federal government and Amtrak is really looking to the state to partner with us to bring this corridor into fruition. Again, to affirm to those who to give them an understanding of where we think passenger rail is going in the United States, that growth in corridors connecting metropolitan areas of 200 to 400 miles, that's really where it's at. That's the sweet spot for passenger rail, where we can provide the mobility options, where we can literally be the third leg of a stool, including highways and air, to increase mobility and, again, increase the economic competitiveness of American regions. I highlight, how Amtrak service is not evenly distributed across the United States, that passenger rail doesn't presently play an outsized role in the state of Minnesota, not because there aren't the customers there, but it's because the service is not there. And I talk about how Amtrak, how our plan is for growth in the large metro areas across the U.S., highlighted by the green circled areas where lots of growth is happening in the South, and the level of service that we provide, or the number of riders, is really a reflection of the amount of service that's provided. So yes, the Northeast Corridor has lots of Amtrak riders, but that's because we provide lots of service. And as we've shown in the state of California, where over my tenure at Amtrak, we've really grown the ridership, the service levels out there, that the public has responded. I like to remind folks that on any day on Amtrak, 1 out of 5 Amtrak customers is on a passenger train in the state of California, a state that years ago was considered so highway-centric that travelers would not be interested in passenger rail. But with the service levels that we're providing, they have responded to it. I highlight the Hiawatha service, again, reminding them that what we're really looking at here is an extension of a very successful corridor in the Midwest, one that has a very high on-time performance, has great acceptance by the business community. We work closely with the business community on how we tailor the services. Businesses have made locational decisions in this corridor because of the presence of these trains. And we have received great support, letters of support for grant applications to the federal government for expansion. And again, I remind the Minnesota legislators that what we're looking to do is extending one of these Hiawatha trains up through the state of Minnesota, up through Wisconsin and to Minnesota, to start to replicate that model of success for the communities of Columbus, Wisconsin Dells, Tomah, La Crosse, Red Wing, the Twin Cities, and Winona. Again, let's convert this to a similar corridor where folks can conduct business, safely travel to and fro, and really drive economic activity into the hearts of these communities. Again, graph there showing Hiawatha performance prior to the pandemic. I remind them that the more you capitalize service, the less that you have to subsidize. As the ridership increases, the operating support declines, and as you can see there on the right, Hiawatha financial results have been, we almost achieved an operating ratio of 1. So in transit world, that is, we think, fantastic. And again, an example of how if you invest in the service, the ridership will respond. I talk about I remind them that, again, the Wisconsin-Illinois partnership has been a successful one in terms of going after federal grants. You can see there a timeline of some of the grants and some of the projects that the states of Illinois and Wisconsin have received to invest in and improve the Hiawatha service. Again, we think that the federal government has shown that they are willing to invest in the corridor all the way up to the Twin Cities by the grants that the states of Wisconsin and Minnesota have been successful in receiving. I again remind them of some of the details of what we're looking at. Again, extension of one Hiawatha service, that adding additional frequencies makes the train more convenient, driving ridership. There are those who've calculated a $25 million annual impact to the communities along the route from the additional use of hotels and restaurants, as well as the construction, and that rural communities would gain as well as urban communities, increasing their access, their ability to retain business and talent. I lay out the successful grant application that the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin have benefited from. TCMC is ready to go. It was the recipient last fall of a $31.8 million federal rail improvement grant. In addition to last spring, they received a restoration and enhancement grant of $12 million to defray the operating subsidy that would be required for the first 3 years. And I remind them that in the state of Minnesota, that $53 million project to start TCMC is really $40 million in track work in the state of Minnesota. So what we're asking of the state of Minnesota is a $10 million investment using their annual capital bonding program that would match $6.7 million from the state of Minnesota, $5 million from Amtrak, and again, we're seeking $10 million from the state of Minnesota, and then we could be off to the races to get this project up and running. And at that, I will leave it up to questions or however you want to handle it, Eric. I know there were some other questions on some other routes, and my colleague Dick, who's on with me, can help me out with some of those questions.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you very much, Derrick, for that. I think that gives us a really good overview, and it's sort of a good place to start from. for our discussion here today. So I'm going to kind of start out with sort of a couple of observations and then maybe some questions, and then I'll hand it over to Frank to do the same, and then I know Crystal will open up the chat box so folks are able to start to put some questions in, and we can try to read some of those. I think generally I very much agree with one of the things you said about the need to increase frequency and the disproportionate impact that increased frequency has on ridership. Generally, we see that across the world, that's actually a more predictive metric of increased ridership and more important than travel time, for example. Just knowing that you have more options if you go someplace for business, for work, you have a means of getting back if you miss a particular train, for example.